This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Well, maybe we can start off, since you have not been on the Melt before. Maybe how would you describe to people who are just now coming upon your work through this interview, how would you describe to them what it is that you do?
I research alternative and hidden history, and one of the titles that I've been given is historical detective, and I like that one a lot. I'm not a trained historian, thank goodness, or I don't think I'd be open to the information that I've received and put back out in the form of my blog, which is piercingtheveilofillusion.com, and my YouTube channel. And I just strongly feel like I was born to do this work, and I'll be 61 this year, actually this month, and I was born just a few months before Kennedy's assassination, and I know there's a lot of questions about that these days. Yeah. All the stuff that seems to be coming out of the woodwork in terms of who, what, when, where, and how, and a lot of misinformation and disinformation. So anyway, in our historical narrative, I was born in July of 1963, and as far back as I can remember, I've had an interest in history, any history, but also in search of with Leonard Nimoy and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World and Robert Stack's Unsolved Mysteries. I love those programs. And I wasn't much of a TV watcher when I was growing up, though I was more of one then than later in my life, like most of my later life. I watched TV a little bit when my husband was alive, and then he passed away in 2001, and it just never really my thing. So I've never really liked the television that much, but there were certain programs that got my interest, and so it was the early attempts at starting to get this information out. Now, strangely enough, I really never got into the Alien program on the History Channel. I know about it. I have friends that watch it. I'm grateful for it, because even though people would, it's not exactly the same thing, at least it's getting otherwise taboo subject matter out to the public. And if they called it Ancient Humans, it would not have lasted at all.
Yes.
And so, I'm glad it gets it out there, even though they speculate about the aliens, which personally I have no problem with aliens, but they're not calling it advanced humans, which is what I see. And through the course of living my life, I just got parts of the puzzle. And I didn't really start waking up until around 2006. I would put it in there somewhere that I really started to get the information in that has led to what I'm doing now. But I was always aware, and I wasn't a conformist, so I was different from most people with different interests, different life choices, and that pattern broke me away from the matrix. And by not being plugged into the matrix, it was easy for me to receive the information and assimilate it and put it in a format to get it back out to people to where they could see it also. Because so much has been not only hidden from us, but the lies upon lies upon lies are unbelievable to this day. Just turn on the TV, read the newspaper,
Yes.
go to a museum. You know, they're pushing a false narrative, and by they would be the globalist elite, the controllers, that I believe are on their way out. They're on their way out. But we've been under a false matrix, and I think matrix is a good word, that they constructed for the purposes of power and control and everything we see playing out in our world today that makes no sense. You know, how did we get to 1984 and 2024? Exactly how did that happen? And was it random or was it planned? And I firmly believe it was planned. Multi-generational, diabolical plan to control us, control resources, control money flow, and create a controllable version of humanity. And if somebody was connected as an organic human or knew their connection to the Creator and each other, they don't want that kind of human. They want one that's completely messed up and controllable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's playing out today. Again, I don't think they're going to get away with it, but that was the direction we were heading.
So you think the end game is total control over humanity?
Yes. And of the Creator and creation. That as fractals of the Creator, we don't know how powerful we are individually and collectively. They're not us. They're parasitic organisms, beings, whatever you want to call them. And so they need our energy, life force energy to survive. And so they were trying to figure out a way to get a permanent supply, which is what transhumanism ultimately is about.
Indeed.
And that's where the roads lead. My personal interest is in the ley line system, the original civilization, which I see as being worldwide, based on sacred geometry, which is something I learned about around 2007 when I really started waking up to all of this. And then what happened to that civilization, which is where the study of the ley lines led me. And then when I was looking at all of that, I saw who came in, how they did it. And so my work started with tracking ley lines and awareness of this original civilization, and then it expanded into what happened, who the families were behind this, how they took control, how they stole the land and identity of the original people, and set up the system for the New World Order so they could harvest all the resources and make tons of money from it, which is how they got so rich.
Can you explain ley lines for someone who maybe doesn't understand that term?
Ley lines are groomed lines of electromagnetic energy that are in alignment with cities and places all over the earth. And it's aligned with geometric grids, so there's geometric patterns. And I was studying about that before I found my own, which is how I had the foundation to know what to do with that. And you said I could share my screen, right?
Absolutely.
Is it set up for that? So where let me see if it will. Oh shoot! Let me try this. Let's see. No. Okay.
Is it? What's it saying?
Let me do that again. So I'll just do it here. This is like StreamYard.
There we go.
So this is my website, and I've been doing this since June of 2018, and I have a lot of information on my website. For those who like to read, for those who like to watch videos, I have a YouTube channel that I've been doing for the same amount of time since June of 2018. Never done anything like this in my life before, but I had this information that I wanted to get out, and I taught myself how to make videos so that I could do that. And it's fairly easy for me to do this work. I like to call myself a well-prepared vessel, in that all the stuff that I was saying that I read and watched and followed, and it was like I was getting this really good grounding in this information that my work is based on. And so when the moment of realization came that I needed to get this back out so that people could to see it and make their own determination about what was going on here, because I really want to encourage people to look around them, question the narrative, do their own research, because this is everywhere. And the way that I like to do it is to show comparisons of the same things in different places, to show people that there's an undeniable similarity between what's in China and what's in Oklahoma, for example. And this was where my journey started. This is a blog post that I did in July of 2018. And this was where my journey started. I had moved to Oklahoma to help my brother with my mom. I lived in Fairbanks in Alaska before that. And that wasn't the easiest situation to step into, but had I not moved from Alaska, I would never have awakened all of this stuff. And so that feels like that was a part of it also. And I learned about sacred geometry, like I said, in 2007, and so I knew what this shape was. And a friend of mine gave me a map that I could spread out and put next to my dining room table. And when I did that and studied it, I started noticing cities lining up in lines. And then I found this line that goes from Edmonton to Ottawa. I took it down here, and I took it back up to Edmonton, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I can find another one. And so, because I was familiar with the dimensions of the star tetrahedron, which is what this shape is, I was able to find this second one, that the bottom point is Merida in Mexico. And then I extended the lines out because I had learned that this ancient civilization was very precise. I already knew about that from other people's work. To my knowledge, this is original. This is what my research is based on, and I'm not aware that anybody else has found this. That just has not come to my attention. But I found this shape in 2016. And so it took me about 2 years to figure out what to do with it. And I watched tons of drone videos and looked at a lot of pictures, because I started to become aware that these places were hidden in parks, and they were hidden by other names. And so, for example, this picture here, these two. That's in Heavener Runestone State Park in eastern Oklahoma. And they're walls. But there's absolutely no attention drawn to these walls at the park. The main feature of the park is the runestone, which is a huge stone with supposedly Viking runes scratched on them, and it's encased in this big glass or plastic case, whatever it's made out of, and that's the whole focus of the park. They don't want you to notice anything else. And this is kind of outside that main park area in a picnic area, and there's no signs or anything. You have to go look for it yourself. Mm-hmm. And then just see what else is here. So let me see if I can figure out how to get back to you. Okay. So that was part of the beginning of my journey into discovering all the information that I could find in the ley lines. And again, they're geometric. Everything's geometrically configured perfectly, actually. And then there's celestial grids also. So it's more or less how the universe is laid out, if you will. Mm-hmm. And this is a highly advanced civilization and higher consciousness. And my research has led me to conclude that Atlantis didn't sink thousands of years ago. It sank at the most hundreds of years ago. And that's being covered up and kept from us. And my research now is going in that direction of what's the evidence for that? What happened? Mm-hmm. What happened to the original people? How was the energy grid reverse engineered from a free energy generating system worldwide to a control system and human energy harvesting system? And who is behind that? And I think a lot of social and human engineering. There's been a lot of talk about the insane asylums and the infantoriums and the orphan trains and what that was all about. And interestingly, in tracking the ley lines, a lot of that story's just fallen out, because the first thing the controllers did when they went in to take over an area was set up breweries and distilleries, bring us hard liquor, bring us opium, the Opium Wars in China, 1842.
Change the frequency.
All about keeping us down, our consciousness down, and sorry about that, miseducated and misinformed, and the Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations were involved in the educational systems, definitely in the United States, but those kinds of things were implemented in different places around the world, and colonies and things like that. That same, they agreed on the new history, the new narrative, and they taught that. They started teaching that in schools. They made going through the schools mandatory, compulsory education, and now they're coming out more as indoctrination centers for these ideologies that are what? That are really starting to come out with the gender ideologies and things like that.
Yes. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is your research more uncovering that there was a unified civilization that was basically covering the whole planet, or are there a few major ones?
There was one, but there were different empires within that civilization. Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so we hear about some of those empires, and we hear that it was warring, and we get this whole history to go along with it of conquest, and all these other things that they want to teach us. But that's not what I see. I see a unified, harmonious civilization with the same infrastructure, same building design. Star forts are a good example all over the earth that I see as batteries on the energy grid system. Cathedrals, lighthouses, buildings, all of the original prisons, schools, museums, all of the original infrastructure that was built by this civilization had a purpose and a function and was very beautiful. And I see the 12 tribes of Israel in there, the original ones, not the Rothschild ones, Khazarian. Those were the elements that came in and hijacked the identity and template of the original people, which I see, and I started with this perspective, that they went back in time to ancient Mu, and that's where the word Moor comes from, the Moors, Moorish Masons, and that this Moorish civilization that goes back way, way far back is the same civilization as the Atlantean civilization. And what I see from my research is that this same Moorish Atlantean civilization existed up until whenever this cataclysm that I believe happened, which would have been relatively recently. But we've been given the explanations that all the architecture in our world has basically been built within the last couple hundred years, especially in North America and places, Australia and other places where it's like that's not anywhere in the narrative. That they had these hunter-gatherers occupying the land, and the land was basically free for the taking, which was not the case at all. Which is again why I think there was some kind of cataclysm that was deliberately caused that ruined the surface of the earth. It could have been more than one within a finite period of time. I believe one of those involved a time manipulation, which I've identified as the Philadelphia experiment. Mm-hmm. And that allowed, let's just say the forces of hell, or these demonic entities to come in and basically colonize Earth, and start the process of implementing this plan of how they were going to take everything over, which is remarkably well organized. And I do see fallen angels in the mix. I think they're part of it, and I think there's other negative beings involved in this, like a vendetta against man and the Creator. And so I think the miracle is that we're waking up at all, considering all that's happened here. But we are. Not fast enough for my liking, but it seems to be getting more every day. And that maybe that's part of why this happened. I don't know. Maybe we had to get to rock bottom spiritually in order to make the right choices about, who do we want to follow? What kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to be prisoners on a slave planet, or do we want to take control and create our own future?
Yes.
And, maybe we just had to be pushed to the limit of what that means because of how horrible what's been taking place is. And so, and we can't bury our head in the sand and ignore it, make it go away. It's just not even possible. We have to confront it as much as possible. Not everybody is going to want to do that, and that's okay. I think the main thing is that enough woke up from the spell enough to start asking the questions and not just blindly believe everything we've ever been taught, because unfortunately there's very good reason not to believe it.
So ley lines are another way of describing basically the world energy grid.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. And it's...
Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and it's not easy to find information on ley lines. And part of the reason for that is that they were removed. You can see them on early maps. And this is something the controllers did not want us to know about, because they've also been manipulating us through the manipulation of these energy lines. There's a connection to our consciousness. Somehow we're all connected through this. And so a lot of times you'll see, if you look into false flags, once you realize the events that are happening that are controlled opposition and created to get an emotional response from us, are being deliberately done. So, shootings and all the things that happen that we're awake to. I remember watching the 72 Olympics and everything that happened with the Israeli, I believe it was the gymnastic team or their Olympic team in 1972, the hostage situation. I remember that vividly because I was really into the Olympics when I was 9 years old. And, now it's like probably a false flag. But at the time, that wasn't even a consideration.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more along those lines where you can kind of see how our current events have been shaped and formed by these terrorist attacks and, the things that have happened that have scared the bejesus out of us. Starting really in 1980, 1981, around the time I graduated from high school, was when the suicide bombings began and AIDS came in, and you go to a disco and it catches fire, or a soccer match and they block the entrances and people can't get out. That mass MK Ultra of the population started around 1980. I did some very in-depth research of our historical narrative starting about 1945, and I got it as far as 1996, and then it's like my original intention was to take it all the way through. It's like it's really hard research, especially it's in our lifetimes.
Yes.
So, but I did get a lot of information just in the the 45 to 96 time period, a lot of information. So between 1945 and let's say 1980, it was primarily World War II stuff, Korea, Vietnam, and then civil wars in Africa. A lot of civil wars in Africa, South America too. And then starting in 1980, it went global. This assault on us, with the terror, the sheer terror of, if I get on that airplane, is it going to be hijacked? Am I going to make it to where I want to go? And it seems like some of that stuff has been creeping back in, but it seems like there was a lull for quite some time. But it was big in the 80s and 90s, as I remember. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it seems like the more media saturated we become, the easier it is to sort of pull strings from a distance. The more channels they have to manipulate us in the narrative.
I agree. And I think that's exactly why it's there.
Mm-hmm.
They've been creating a virtual world for us for a long time. And it started particularly around the Civil War, which I'm looking more and more and more like it was nothing like what they told us. Something happened, but it wasn't what we were told. But a lot of things start popping into the narrative in the 1850s, 1860s, and one of the things that came in the 1860s was a publication of dime westerns. So really cheap Western novels for kids, primarily boys, to start shaping that narrative in young minds about what the West really was. Like cowboys and Indians and, mountain men and bank robbers and all of that stuff. So that narrative was getting into young minds. And then somewhere in there, after getting the Old West narrative going, they brought in circuses, and that brought in probably a lot of different elements, but the idea of bread and circuses, entertaining people, not necessarily seeing what's around you or living your own life, but going to these places where a show's being put on of some kind. And that came in, dime museums came in, and they were basically permanent freak shows. And P.T. Barnum, who was big in the circus movement, was also big in the dime museum movement, where they would bring in a lot of sideshow kinds of elements. From flea circuses to the bearded lady, the tattooed lady, whatever. That became a fixture. And then pulp magazines, and you get into those kinds of stories. I'm sorry. Those kinds of stories, and I don't get much on my phone, but I guess I am tonight. You're going to be editing this, right?
Yes, sure.
Let me just turn that off. Sometimes I'm using it for my hotspot, so sometimes I have to have it on, but my other hotspot's working better on these things for some reason. So,
Gotcha.
So anyway, you had dime museums, you had pulp magazines, pulp fiction. You had the barnstorming come in with the air shows and the tightrope walkers and wing walkers and guys that would jump from falls and jump to their deaths because that's just a crazy thing to do. After they survived a couple times and they think they can do it forever. That came in around that time. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was the most famous Wild West show, but then there were others. There were a lot of other Wild West shows. So they're bringing that narrative in. The World's Fairs, same idea. Taking credit for what the original civilization did, but they're also conditioning people with this new narrative. They would roll out a lot of new products. Jack Daniels, cotton candy, or ones I can think of off the top of my head, were introduced at these World's Fairs.
Movies.
And the movies came in. So the movies came in, I think the first...
But they were introduced at the World's Fair. Alice Guy was one of the first filmmakers that ever released a film at a World's Fair.
So those things were coming in to get us focused on whatever they wanted to present to us. The silent movies... Silent westerns started it off, and then the western movies, and then the other movies, and that's just the thing. I mean, I went to see movies with my friends when I was growing up. I saw movies like Star Wars in the theater. That was a thing we did, like all of us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Unless somebody for some reason didn't grow up going to the movies, that was the exception rather than the norm. The junk food at the movies, the junk food at the ball games. Ball games are like a ritual. They all have, there's something going on with these organized things, organized sports, organized gambling. I can throw religion in there, organized religion. I mean, they really got into everything. And so I know a lot of people believe in cyclic resets, and that's not what I see. I see a long-lasting advanced civilization and one massive reset. And I mean, they got into everything in our existence. And so that's one of the reasons it's been so hard to break out of the spell, is because from the day we're born, we have these things reinforced in school, in church, in music, in movies, on television. This is all reinforced, so it's all we know. And so even though we're walking by megalithic stone blocks every day, and I can say with certainty they're everywhere. I've got a megalithic stone wall outside of my bedroom window that nobody else sees but me. There's a creek, Aspen Creek runs beside my place, and there's big stone blocks I get to see those every day. Those are everywhere. But they've been hidden from us because we haven't been told about it. And then we're taught all these things are natural, and we don't see it. And one of my favorite things to do is just really encourage people, just start looking in your own community, because you really don't have to go far to find it. And not just with the megalithic stone blocks, but also with the older buildings. It could be libraries, it could be the courthouse, it could be the old theater. A lot of them have been torn down, but there's still a lot there. Schools, colleges, prisons, they're all in there. And it's like once you start to see it, you can't not see it.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to be open and willing to all this information, or you're still not going to see it. If you go, oh no, that's nature does that. Rectangular, perfectly cut square stone block. But that's, it's hard to get to that point where it's easy to let go of all the things that we've been taught. It's just hard to believe how much has been sold to us as truth that isn't. And unless somebody's really ready for it, it's not a subject that I would bring up to people that don't come to me first, which is the beauty of the internet.
Yeah. You can pick who you interact with, and people sort of have to find you and your research out, and then usually they're invested already. You're not just, you don't have like a podium on a street corner shouting the stuff and have to deal with people in a more confrontative way.
And that wouldn't be my style anyway.
Yeah.
That's not really me.
That doesn't get anything done.
I'm really a very quiet, introverted person. Really.
So you don't see the cyclical reset narrative as something that seems feasible. So do you see it more as a set of sort of staged cataclysms? Or has it just been... go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. So I see one massive, unbelievably horrific event that was probably partly based on sound and partly based on some kind of directed energy weapon or nuclear weapon. Because there's damage through the surface of the earth. There's places where the earth has just sheared off. Right next to lighthouses and railroad tracks. I think whatever energy weapon and sound weapon came in here, it was done through the grid system. And so there's just whole big swaths of landmass, I think, that just sank. And then on so-called solid ground, you have swamps and bogs and estuaries. And if you really look at those, that's ruined land. There was infrastructure there at one time. And I've done quite a bit of research around that. And again, that's something that's sold to us as natural area, refuges and wetlands and things like that. There's way more to the story. And so that's an area. I mean, I've seen examples of railroad tracks that go through water or go through desert. Again, they have the same story of all this was built recently. Well, how? And I think the deserts, the dunes, the swamps, all of that was ruined at the time of these cataclysms. And I think up until that time, everything was fine and harmonious and beautiful. Sound, frequency, all of that was used to benefit instead of to control. And so they mistuned everything because frequency is a big deal. They know that. The controllers know that, and the original civilization knew that. So your organs and your bell towers and your beautiful cathedral rose windows that match solfeggio frequency patterns. If you go into a big cathedral, the organ pipes will be right up against the rose window. Older train stations that are still standing have these same cathedral windows. And it's like everything was, humming along. The sound, I think the bell towers were sending these healing frequencies out to the universe. I think Earth was like a grand central station that kept everything in harmony and balance. I mean, I really think it was the kingdom of God in physical form here, until evil saw a way to crash the party and come in and take that over. And a good way of framing this, and I'm very comfortable with this, is the whole idea of the millennial reign and the short season of Satan. But when we talk about millennial, so like the millennial reign of Christ, we don't know how long a millennium is. We've been told it's 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been much longer, and that's what I see, is that it was much longer. And the idea that the last however many hundred years has been that short season that was prophesied, and all hell broke loose here. They came in, they took over, and they're not going to get away with it. So I think we have powerful forces helping us now. That if you've been down the rabbit hole enough, there's a lot of people that are like, they think they're going to get away with it. And I don't think they're going to get away with it. Knowing the unfathomably large number of crimes against humanity and the Creator that have taken place. I don't see that as our future, and I don't think that was... Things are hanging in the balance here now, and that's why this awakening is so important, because whatever happens here is going to affect the future of everything. So are the evil, murderous, brutal parasites going to last forever, or is their time almost up and the kingdom of God coming back? And I'm putting my money on the kingdom of God coming back. That's our future. But this is a really scary place to be. Once you're awake to it and know what's going on, it's pretty darn scary.
Prescott?
But we all...
Prescott's a scary place to be?
Well, well, actually it is, but that's beside the point. This is a mud-flooded place.
Really?
It's like where the old world meets the old west, where I live.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
So
that's a great place for someone like you to be.
it is, actually, and I didn't plan it. It just what opened up for me.
Lovely.
But generally speaking, when you're awake and know what's going on in the world today, the child trafficking and the ritual sex abuse and all this stuff
Mm-hmm.
that we know now that we didn't know even just a few years ago, that's coming out more. The corruption of governments and corporations, and it's just for those with eyes to see, it's just becoming more and more obvious.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of what needed to happen, because if they tried to force it sooner, and I by they I mean the good guys. If the good guys had tried to force it sooner, with as indoctrinated and asleep as most people were, it could have caused a lot more chaos. A lot of people predicted civil war and things like that. I think by letting it play out before lowering the boom, if you will, more people can see it that would not have otherwise seen it. When it starts to affect people on a personal level. I don't have children in school, but if you have children in school and start to see some of the things that school boards and schools are pushing on kids and things like that. And things people have to experience, unfortunately, to understand how serious this is. And it's just really, it feels like a massive attack on humanity that's been going on. But I'm an optimist. I'm going to stay an optimist. My feeling is we'll know something one way or the other by the end of the year, but I think it'll be good. by the end of the year. I
like
think
it.
we're there. Finally.
So this great cataclysm that you mentioned, is this the same one that you think that the Philadelphia experiment had something to do with?
That's one of them.
Okay, so there is more than one
I think
cataclysm.
there was more than one.
Okay.
I put out a long, almost a little over 3-hour video within the last couple of months on how I think the Philadelphia experiment caused one cataclysm.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a man named Aleister Crowley was heavily involved in what's taken place here. And he was known to have been involved on the day of the Philadelphia experiment with the ritual. And in that ritual, on August 12th of 1943, he passed his son through a circular megalith at Menontoll in Cornwall. And that line of rough energy crossed the ocean and went through Montauk Lighthouse, Montauk Point, and on through central Long Island and down into the New Jersey area. And the Philadelphia Naval Yard is in that location. And there's a lot of interesting stuff just in that stretch of real estate between actually the tip of Cape Cod, which I think is the first place that that line of energy hit, because there's a very tall granite structure there. It's a bell tower. It's the tallest granite structure in North America, and it would have hit that. And my belief is that the original system was perfectly tuned and resonant, and that hitting the bell tower caused a forced resonant frequency through that whole system, and that's what caused the destruction. And if you start looking into forced resonance, what happens is it causes destruction. So if you introduce a second signal to a resonant system, the second signal will like cause a wine glass to break in demonstrations. And then there's other examples, but it would have been very capable of creating the kind of forces needed to create this devastation that goes through the land there. And so, for example, in Cape Cod, you have the Pine Barrens, the coastal Massachusetts Pine Barrens. In Long Island, you have the central Long Island Pine Barrens, and then you have the New Jersey Pine Barrens, right next to where the Philadelphia Naval Yard is located. And then through that part of New Jersey, it's kind of known to be an interdimensional portal. And then Brookhaven National Laboratory, which has a mirror of CERN, a reverse of CERN, between the lighthouse and these other places. So you've got high velocity and energy physics locations through here. I mean, if you're going to send a naval vessel back in time, which is what I think happened with the Philadelphia experiment, that would be the place to do it. Mm-hmm. And so what I think is that this experiment caused the USS Eldridge to go back in time and create a rip in the fabric of space-time in 1740, 1741, which was the years of the Great Frost of Ireland. And that it's recorded in the narrative, and like supposedly 500,000 people died, and it was the coldest, just unexplained cold period. But within a few years after the Great Frost of Ireland, Mayor Amschel Rothschild was born in 1744, the progenitor of the Rothschilds. Adam Weishaupt was born in 1748, and he was the founder of the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. Mm-hmm. And after that, in 1750, Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld was born, and he was the progenitor of the House of Windsor in Britain. And an obscure ducal line basically replaced the royal families of Europe that were taken out either by the Cataclysm, or if they were still there, which they appear to have been in the historical narrative, maybe. It's hard to say exactly what they did. But there were these revolutions and wars in like the 1800s, the revolutions of 1830 and 1848, where they were basically taking down these original royal houses in our narrative. And so, they were replacing them with their own bloodline, and then bring us freedom and democracy and a form of government where they can override the will of the people and install their own person, which is what we're seeing today with the elections and everything in different countries. So they replaced a stable hereditary system, which I believe was connected to the tribes of Israel and the House of Solomon. So the rulers of those houses would have, was way different from what we've been taught. And that they replaced it with a system that could ultimately be manipulated to keep them in power. And it was never about freedom, human rights and freedom. That was never their goal. It was only in there to get our consent, which they have to have. Mm-hmm. Because of free will, and we're naturally sovereign. But they've tricked us to give that up too. They're, tricked us to believe they're all powerful and they're sovereigns when they really can't lay a finger on us. So the only way they can do that is to rig the system.
Yes.
And have us give it away voluntarily because we don't know any better.
Exactly. Ignorance. So do you see this mainly as I hate to use the word battle, but maybe it's appropriate, a spiritual battle that maybe some more worldly players have sort of taken the opportunity to sort of cash in on that, or to ride that wave in order to establish a more oppressive system of control over humanity?
I would say that's a really good description of it. I do see it as spiritual warfare. And I'm not well versed on the Bible, and I would not consider myself I see myself more of the opinion that we're all essentially the same being having our own experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you do see that referenced in the Bible. We're at war with spirits and principalities and all of that. And I think that's very accurate. And what would be nice is when all of this is said and done, is when good prevails, it never happens again like this. Mm-hmm. That would be amazing.
Like we learn from it. And we don't have to go sit through that lesson again.
Yep. That those dark principalities have been subdued and don't have the same abilities to do what they've done here. And I think another thing with kind of pinging off what you just said is that this is like our graduation. You could consider it like a final exam or something. I mean, Amen. Do we pass this test or not of being good, kind, decent people, with a good moral compass, knowing the difference between right and wrong as a collective, and not see the kids that are driving over the man that they stole the car from, which I think showed up on the news within the last 6 months or so, and more examples of that. Mm-hmm. Or taking your kid to Drag Queen Story Hour, it's like, common sense, people. but we've lost a lot of that because we've been desensitized to a lot of that stuff. Whereas I grew up primarily in the 70s and 80s, so that would be my coming of age time. It's just nothing like this. I mean, this stuff was still going on. I grew up, I can remember putting articles about the Vietnam War and the sit-upon I was making as a brownie. So I would have been about 7 years old. So I was alive when the Vietnam War happened. I was a little too old for or a little too young for the Beatles. So they were separated by the time I really became aware of music at the time. And I remember, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so I remember the refugees coming in. And our church was really involved in hosting them, and I got to know quite a few people from Vietnam during that time. So I have vivid memories of that. But in terms of the absolute insanity of what's going on these days, we didn't have that.
No. It seemed like on many, many levels that we were more, at least there was the illusion, but I like to think that we actually were more unified. I think the main psyop going on right now is basically different ways of going about divide and conquer tactics, and they've been so utterly successful with the COVID narrative, with the left willingly dividing itself more and more and more into finer and more special interest groups, to the point where they're not even unified within their group anymore. But it's really alienated a lot of people from one another, and I think that's the saddest part of the whole thing. Is I didn't feel that when I was younger. And of course, I was more naive and I didn't have as much experience under my belt. But it just seemed like, I don't know. It just seemed like there was more people were on this a relatively similar frequency.
Yeah, I agree with that also. It was. So are we around the same age?
In September, I'm going to turn 58.
Okay, so we're pretty much in the same generation. It almost seems as if our parents' generation got hit with the indoctrination and the programming of watching the news every night and reading the paper every day. I know that was the case with my parents and their siblings. That's just what you did. And you live the American dream, and you buy a house, and you have a family, and a good life is measured by your bank account.
Yes.
My parents were both teachers, fairly well educated, not rich, but I had a pretty decent upbringing. Lots of good experiences, good role models. Associated with good people, didn't have any trauma in my life. No pain and suffering that was in my immediate upbringing. Of course, hearing about it in other places, but not experiencing that directly. And then so there's what was going on in that generation, and then in the generations after ours, they've been hit hard by the cultural indoctrination and all of that stuff. So it almost feels like our generation got the least affected by all of this programming. And that might be too much of a blanket statement, but I know a lot of people around our age that didn't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And woke up and started asking questions and starting their own podcast and YouTube channels and say, look at this, think about this. And you've got some older people that are in that category, and you've got younger people in that category. But I think as an age group, we kind of fall in that, we had enough of experience with what the best that this world had to offer at the time. And I mentioned movies at the beginning. So, go to school, hang out with your friends, go to the mall on a Saturday to go to a movie, walk around the mall. That was a fun time. And it, it's not, it wouldn't be my thing now, but at the time it was, how you fit in and what you did and all that
Yeah.
stuff. So, I mean, but that wasn't anything terrible that we were aware of. But again, the circumstances change and everything else. And like I said, I graduated in '81, so it was around that time that these world events started to heat up. And there started to be more mass casualty kinds of events out in the world where you just didn't know where the next one was going to be. And I see that as just creating that fear, that conditioned fear, which
Yes.
makes people more controllable and give up more of their freedoms in exchange for safety and security, which, the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution.
Yes.
I actually don't agree with either one of you at all. I think we were steeped in indoctrination. I think that there was a lot of sexual indoctrination, a lot of objectification of women. I think we kind of grew up with the me generation parents, the people who got into est and got into self-reflection and got very kind of narcissistic about that. And I think a lot of people in our generation got lost because of that. But I also think that it created a lot of vulnerability, because the generation you're talking about before that was also involved in MK Ultra and mind control programs. And so I would say this has been going on for thousands of years. I don't think any of this stuff is new. I think there have been versions of divide and conquer since the beginning of man. I think that's a tribalism that is part of our reptilian brain. So maybe I don't have an idealized version of the 80s because I grew up in a not idyllic family, and I saw a lot of racism and a lot of sexism and a lot of divisiveness around the country. And I also saw the first milk carton kid, Johnny Gosh, and the fear of kidnappings and the whole programming behind satanic trauma and children being kidnapped and trafficked. And so again, I don't think any of this stuff is new. I think what we experience is cultural amnesia. So every generation thinks that we've invented all of the traumas that we're experiencing. I think it's just same rule book, different set of players, different set of predators. But I think this is just kind of the version that we are experiencing right now. But I think there's been some form of this. I have magazines from the 50s and 60s that are just as objectifying and just as confusing to women and sending confusing messages as things that young women are seeing on Instagram. So I think this is kind of a delusion that we have where we think like, oh, the good old days. Well, maybe it was never good old days. Maybe we've always experienced some version of this. What do you guys think?
I think those are really good points. And to break it down a little bit, I did have a pretty stable upbringing. There was a lot of dysfunction in my family, but overall, it could have been a lot worse. My parents weren't great parents, but they did the best that they could. And so I didn't become aware of any of the really, really dark stuff that you're talking about until the last, let's say, 15 years. And it was because of the internet and the availability of alternative sources that I was interested in following. And I don't know, did you ever follow anything on Gaia.com?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I watched a lot of stuff on that, and then I started having streaming problems with it, and I just gave up in frustration, and that was years ago. And then I started hearing things about Gaia, and it's like, okay, I've just let that go. But before I heard about infiltration of Gaia, I watched most of David Wilcock's episodes on disclosure.
Yes.
And he revealed a lot of this stuff. The millionaires and their depopulation plans, and I think I first heard about the Olympics opening ceremony in London in 2012 with all the stuff going on in that.
Hospital beds.
Yeah. So I think I got a lot of this information from David's program on that, and then it just came up, in different areas in different ways. And it's still not the rabbit hole that I go down,
Right.
but you have to know about the dark stuff too, unfortunately. Sure. I mean, you don't have to, but there was some reason that came into my awareness with the work that I do now. So, relatively speaking, I'll say, I understand what you're saying with it's been there. The kids on the milk cartons, and at the time you think they're missing kids, and now it's like, what happened to them? The whole child trafficking and satanic stuff and all that kind of stuff. It's like, not even a thought in the head. Just these kids on milk cartons, and I never knew anybody that had any experiences like that.
Yeah.
And then I joined the Army in 1982, and that's kind of when I started making my way away from my beginnings and my birth family and having my own set of life experiences. So it has been going on for a while. I do see a shorter period of time that this evil has come in and done this. I don't see it as having lasted forever. And that's the research, that's the guidance that I've had in my research and what I see. That being said, I think everything's on the table. And the only way we're going to get to the bottom of what's happened here is, just put it all out there. Every theory that there is, and anybody that's questioning the narrative and doing their own work, it's all valuable because so much has been removed from us, so much truth, that all we have are puzzle pieces and fragments to work with. And so I've been guided a very specific way in my research, and I've compiled lots and lots of examples. But 100% what's been going on here for a bit, I say a couple 100 years, that's my guess, but longer perhaps, is evil, is absolutely evil, and meant to be divisive, and meant to be manipulative, and meant to harvest our energy. And I just gave the example with my experience with the generations and people in around my age group, is that I've known more people that are awake and open to this in that group than in people older than myself, my family included. The people that are more open to this kind of thing, any different thinking. My cousin's age, not my aunt and uncle's age, not my parents' age. And then, unfortunately, with the younger generations, they seem to be directly affected by the indoctrination of going after the youth in one way, shape, or form, whether it's gender ideology or, whatever else. And then, you throw the whole pandemic in there, and that seemed to have woke up a lot of people. I was already awake, but I've talked to a lot of people that really started to wake up and question when that took place. They had time and started researching and looking into things and asking questions. And so, people seem to be at different places on this. this continuum of what's going on here and what's been going on. But they're all really good points. I mean, I was just very blessed to have had a relatively stable upbringing.
You're
my
so lucky.
Though my parents were far from
Same here.
perfect. They were far
You're
from perfect.
But
Same
you're so lucky, seriously. Like you should thank them every day energetically for that gift, because I think that that's probably helped you mentally to deal with the events of the past few years, because you have that foundation.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, they were just as affected by a lot of the things we've been talking about as everybody else. But I saw doctors regularly. I went to the dentist regularly. I played soccer. I had my friends. I was okay. I never felt threatened by anything, and lived in an area with a lot of good role models. And then I just kind of broke off on my own when I joined the Army, and had a lot of different kinds of experiences. Some good, some not so good.
I'm so curious, Michelle, about what you said about the Old World and the Old West meeting in Prescott. I wish we could really spend some more time on the Tartaria subject, because I feel like there's such a new and ignited interest in Tartaria, and the idea that there are these areas of the world that are connected, even though they are very geographically separated from each other. Can you speak more about Prescott just in relation to that?
Yeah, I sure can. Because Prescott is like a microcosm of what I see around the world. So, for starters, when people talk about what's called the mud flood, that's the best way to describe it. Let's start with there. There's certain things, like you look at a street, and the street will be slanted. And as the street goes down, you've got full windows up here, and it goes down, the windows get smaller and smaller and smaller. You see bricked up archways or whatever. Well, this town is full of that. And hills. I mean, insane hills. Like every time I go outside, it's like, what am I looking at? Because it's like the earth was just pushed up. Wow. and undulating. And so I've seen that effect in many other places, but it really stands out here. And I've already stated my belief that these cataclysms went through the Earth's grid system, and Sedona, which is an hour and a half drive from where I live, is a nodal point on the Earth's grid system. So there's 12 primary nodal points. Sedona is the only one in North America. And so this area would have been hard hit by that. And I see the evidence for that. I see it here in Prescott. I see it in Cottonwood and Sedona, all around here. So it's almost like there was a standing wave or something that went through the land. But the desert Southwest and all the desert areas in the world look like they were hit by a bomb. And one of the nice things about Google Earth is you can see that. So if you look at North Africa and the Sahara, it's just like you can see where the desert just kind of flows down on the western side where Mauritania and Morocco are. It's just, and so it's just, there's these vast areas of devastation on this Earth's surface, including the desert Southwest. And so I was looking at the sound wave theory as to how that could have happened, and I've got a lot of evidence to support that, or I wouldn't even say it. But then the desert had to come from somewhere. And for example, I was updating some research that I did in 2020, where I was going across North Africa following an alignment or ley line, whatever, however you want to call it. And I was looking at Tunisia, and in the southern part of Tunisia is a region called Tatooine. Tatouine, which looks like Tatooine in Star Wars. I
Mm-hmm.
said I remember watching that in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw that name, I'll look that up. How did Tatooine become a desert planet? And when I looked that information up, the story that came back was that on Tatooine, or Tatooine, whatever it's called, in Star Wars, it had been a lush planet with an advanced people and 2 stars. And they were invaded by the Rakatan Invincible Empire. They were enslaved. There was some kind of epidemic that weakened the invaders, and the inhabitants of Tatooine drove them off, and they retaliated by bombarding the surface of that planet, creating glass, and then the glass turned to sand. And there's a lot of disclosure in movies, and so would not surprise me in the slightest that that was telling us our story, or part of our story is that it was hit by something that caused all of this desert that we see. So but what I do believe is that it was a coordinated attack on Earth and not a random event. It was like the controllers were shovel ready. These families were shovel ready to come in and dig out and make things operational again. And I don't think that would have happened if it had been a random event. I think they planned for it, just like they planned what's going on all through the past generations of this world that we know. So
if you're a sensitive person and you are near a ley line, are you going to pick up on some energetic frequency? Are there people who are attracted to those areas? What is the connection? What's the human connection with a ley line?
okay. Actually, there's people that are really, really in tune with ley lines and can pick up that information. I have talked to people with abilities like that. For me, I do have a connection with it, but I would call mine more intuitive. And so it's like when I found that shape in North America that I call the star tetrahedron, I had lived on places on that star without having
Wow.
any idea of of its existence.
Wow.
So, like, one of the places that has 2 lines crossing through it is Buffalo, Wyoming. And my husband and I lived there for 2 years, from 1999 to 2001, and then he passed away in 2001. He was a retired Army sergeant that had spent time in Vietnam, and I found out when I moved to Arizona in 2017 that it was the result of Agent Orange. Well, at the time we didn't know what it was, but we had moved to Buffalo, I loved it there. If I had had a crystal ball that worked, I would have stayed there, but I didn't. So I ended up having a lot more different life experiences, but I really liked Buffalo. So that was one of the places. And then Oklahoma City, where I started really waking up to this, is prominent on this thing. So it's like I've lived on or near these ley lines without having any idea. And it was like, it almost feels like there's a timed release or something, because I was probably in my 40s before I really started getting this information and putting together things I had been exposed to long before but didn't know what to do with. So it's almost like 2012, let's put a year on it, because I had moved to Oklahoma. That was when I started to see things in the environment and notice things. And that marks the beginning of the path that I'm on now. But prior to that, I was like everybody else. I didn't see what I started to see. And then when I started to see the earthworks and the megalithic stones and all this stuff coming out, it was like do a double take, and it's like, am I the only one that sees this? But it really felt like I was waking up to it. So I had that under my belt, living in Oklahoma 2012 to 2016, and then I moved to Arizona, let's say in 2017, early in 2017, and seeing the same kinds of things here, plus the desert environment, and then just, the whole process of everything I've learned since then. But Arizona is like cowboys and Indians. It's like John Wayne and Monument Valley and, the heart of the whole cowboy narrative. And Prescott is, the world's oldest rodeo, 1886, is known for that. And Doc Holliday living here, one of the people associated with the gunfight at OK Corral and saloons and shootouts and all this other stuff. And so that's the story that goes with it, and that's what gets promoted, and that's what everybody believes. But if you come to this place and you see the old world buildings and the gigantic courthouse with the gigantic columns, it's a huge Greco-Roman looking building, which most government buildings and courthouses and municipal buildings look like, but we don't question it because they all have a story. But that's old world architecture. And then the same thing with banks and other things here in Prescott, where they're given a story, but it's really old world architecture. And so it's pretty fascinating to be here. You get a little bit of that not so much in Sedona, because I think that's newer. That was more of a sacred place. A little bit in Cottonwood, a little bit in Clarkdale and Jerome, which are all communities here in the area. Jerome is actually very old, but the same cowboy narrative goes along with it. And, it's like, my opinion is that the resetters came in and just kind of made things livable again. So like the Freemasons and the Oddfellows and the Knights of Pythias and the Elks. And there are other groups as well that were involved in making these places serviceable, livable, and creating the narrative to go along with them. So who built what building and when, things like that.
So would this reset be a result of, would the mud flood be a result of like an earthquake or a tsunami or something that happened in the Earth's core, and that shift is what shifted like the geography of these buildings, or changed just the dynamic of a city itself?
Something along those lines. So I gave the example of sound frequency that could have caused that, and then the example of some kind of directed energy weapon. Again, I think it went through the grid system, and it caused multiple different kinds of effects. So in some places it would have liquefied the ground, and you see that with earthquakes. Now you can look on YouTube and find footage of liquefaction events. But then there's also, if you look at like a snowfall, a heavy snowfall, and you see the patterns of that, it looks a little bit like that. And so it could have come from above, or maybe shifting wind patterns, so some kind of violent event that caused different effects. But I do see that there was some kind of accompanying surface event that caused all of the desertification that we see. I mean, every continent has desert on it, and I do not believe it was always like that, and millions of years ago, or thousands of years ago. I think these events just turned the land to desert and dunes, and also swamps and bogs and estuaries. And one thing about the research that I do along ley lines is I'm a really detailed oriented person. So when I'm going from place to place, looking at different locations along a ley line, for example, and look at an area. So I did a piece called Trekking the Serpent Lay last year, and there's another man by the name of Peter. It's spelled Champous, and his website is geometryofplace.com. He's done some wonderful work on these ley lines in North America, and so I tracked the one that he identified as the Serpent Lay, and one of my viewers had brought his work to my attention, and I went from place to place, discovered a lot of information in the process of doing that. But the place I'm thinking of specifically is called the Horicon Marsh, and it's spelled Horicon in Wisconsin. And when you really start looking at it, it was a place that was sacred to the Winnebago, and you see these wetland places, and you see what looks like, canals and rivers going through them. And so I did some in-depth research around that, and that looks like a place that was just devastated by whatever took place. And the river system or canals that go through there, and I think the rivers are canals, were part of this original energy system. Again, the stories that go along with it really don't match up with what we're told we were capable of. It's like, say, in the mid to late 1800s. So we're before the Industrial Revolution, and we're more agrarian, and yet we're building incredible architecture and infrastructure at the same time. So it really doesn't match what we're told we were capable of. So I just wanted to give the example of the Horicon Marsh as an example of.
It's interesting because it seems almost like the Earth is like a mandala, and that every few thousand years someone just comes along and just brushes it off, all of the sand, and we start all over. What I'm curious about, Michelle, is what do you think happened with all of the people? So in like the Atlanteans or the Mayans, do you think that there was a mass ascension or a mass genocide or a pandemic? Where do you think that these people went?
I think they're underneath us. I think these events buried them where they were. There's, you hear about giant bones. Mm-hmm. They were in newspapers, they were in shops in the 19th century. And you can see pictures of shops in Wheeling, West Virginia, with skulls and a giant skeleton standing outside. I'm doing some research with somebody right now where we're looking at some of the articles that were in newspapers in the 1800s and some of the implications of those, and how bones were found, burned, and immolated. Like 50,000 bones were said to have been found at the Grave Creek Mound in West Virginia, Moundsville, West Virginia. There's a story there, and the fact that the establishment does not want us to know anything about giants. So they were all over the newspapers in the 1800s. They were displayed in stores and things like that. People would put a tent over them and charge admission so people could come in and see the giant skeletons. Those were made to go away. The Smithsonian was complicit in that, and probably some other organizations, maybe some of the ones I mentioned before, Freemasons, Oddfellows, that group. And now, if there's a giant skeleton reported anywhere, you've got the fact checkers to come out and say, hoax, fake. So they don't want us to know that there were giants here. And there's, they killed each other off in wars a long time ago. Is one aspect to it. Another aspect is there was an advanced civilization here, but we don't know who they were. We don't know anything about them. When you look at what's in the written narrative, but somebody knows, and somebody doesn't want us to know about their existence. So I think after this event, we became much smaller, and that could very well have been engineered. Human engineering, social engineering. You talk about the reptilian brain. I mean, whatever they did to get us to whatever our average height is now, whereas before it was much, much taller. And I think
What
that's
is
where
your
I think that's where the infantoriums come in, and all the stories about whatever was going on in the 1900s, mostly 1800s, with the orphan trains, and there was just a lot going on in the 19th century that I think if we knew the full truth of it, we would just be absolutely horrified by what was taking place.
What is your genetic take on giants? Do you think they were the result of fallen angels and humans crossbreeding, or something completely different?
I do think it was something completely different, but I can't really. I think the original humans were just larger. So if you look at Egypt, for example, you have gigantic statues at a lot of these temples. And forgive me, my brain's just not wanting to cooperate right now, but the major temples in Egypt, if you look them up, just I have some in mind, but can't pull the name. But they have gigantic statues at the entrances. Why would people our size build gigantic statues like that? And also the idea that the larger humans were in higher consciousness. We were just in a, we weren't stuck down in our lower chakras. We were more connected with our higher selves as individuals and as a human collective. So I think humans were much larger. Most people know about the Nephilim. So I'm not going to say there weren't any Nephilim, because I don't know that. And I do believe that the fallen angels are behind a lot of our problems. I mean, if Moloch is a household name today, and Moloch was one of those angels that Satan or Lucifer or whoever conspired with and to bring down us, which is what Paradise Lost is all about. Mm-hmm. He was named in Paradise Lost, and Moloch is still in our current events. To me, that's not an accident. That is a real being. So they seem to have different personalities. Baal is in there somewhere, Baal. We hear those names today. And these creepy statues of a Baphomet character show up at places like the Arkansas State Capitol. Yeah. They want this being to be the overlord. And it's like,
I thought that was the Oklahoma State Capitol.
It might have been in Oklahoma too. I know he showed up in Arkansas too.
Yeah.
So that's what they're trying to bring in. This not amorphous, hermaphrodite kind of character, which is a lot of what's going on with the transgender stuff. They want to mess up us as young as possible, and bring in this worship of this other being and not the creator of the universe. And so, again, ask if that's a spiritual war. I'd say yes, it's a spiritual war, a battle that they're not going to win. But that's what's driving these events, and that's why as many people waking up as possible is so important. However that happens.
And they complicate matters too by sort of substituting the major religions for science and all of the atheism and materialist reductionism that goes along with that. So they're simultaneously using those tactics while also taking it off the menu for the masses, so they are not even looking in that direction.
Well, but also bastardizing every version of every religion. So not really sharing actual sacred texts, but editing editing all religions to form, whatever global ideology is part of the agenda. So I think that religion is another thing that's being used as part of the scientism narrative.
Yep.
What were
I
you
agree
saying?
with you, Hunter. I see that too. And I got a name in Egypt. The Temple of Luxor is one of them.
Yes.
Luxor, with the gigantic columns and the gigantic statues. But yes, unfortunately, they want to keep us as confused and dumbed down as they possibly can. And then, that gets into the ways that we've been poisoned with fluoride and whatever's in our clothes and whatever's in our food, what's ever coming down from chemtrails. That's been part of this, how their MO for a long time. And, so they're doing everything they can to replace us with what they want. They only want the controllable people. The controllers only wanted the controllable humans.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing that the Georgia Guidestones were destroyed. Other people are, I'm not sure. But on the Georgia Guidestones, like the first line was keep 500 million in perpetual balance. They put it in stone what their goals were, but they made it sound really good, but it wasn't. So anyway, I was happy when the Guidestones were destroyed. Whoever did it.
Isn't it crazy, though, after all the shit we've all been hit with for thousands and thousands of years, that we're still here? Like, when you think of the spiritual warfare and the religious battles and the chemical warfare and all of the things that humans have endured in the course of our history, and yet we're still here. So this predator race, because I refuse to call them elite, I don't think they're elite. This predator race, I think they're probably very vexed by us, because it's like they can shoot us with all this shit, and somehow we are resilient enough to keep going, which really says something about the human spirit and what we're capable of.
Absolutely. And a big part of the reason I think we've got a much better future than what was planned for us. And like I said, the fact that we're waking up at all with everything that they've thrown at us is really miraculous. And it's taken way too long. I mean, I've really started to wake up, like I said, starting in 2006, but really in 2012. And so I've been anxiously waiting for things to change. And I'm seeing slow change. I'm seeing it. And I'm seeing, people that watch my channel, more and more comments of people waking up and looking around and asking questions. So I see that happening as well. Not in my everyday life so much, not in my family so much, but in the cyber community I do.
Yeah.
It takes courage to be curious. It takes a lot of courage, and some people are just happy with the status quo because that's what they can manage.
Well, and I think going back to media too, I think media is the interface between many people and the world, the entire world, all of existence. So whatever comes through that tube, they don't have time to, or they don't make time to question that or research it or even, think that there might even be a completely different take than, or that the people telling you what's going on are so compromised by who pays them and who is giving them the script that it's so easy to get lost when that's your food, on how the world works and what is okay and not okay to think about or question. And, it's so easy, so blatantly easy to hoodwink huge masses of people.
And I really see that with my younger brother Alan, who's 10 years younger than me. We're so similar in so many ways. He's a college professor, Baptist seminary. He's very good at what he does in his own way. It's like we're mouthpieces of different messages. But I really, he's aware of that I'm doing something. I've never really talked to him about exactly what I do, but when I first started blogging, I sent him my blog, very early on. So he was impressed with what I had that he saw, but I haven't really gone down the rabbit hole with him because I don't want to upset his world.
Sure.
And I respect him and his beliefs and his family, and what I'm saying is very different from his beliefs. But I'm bringing this up because he fits the description of what you just said. He's a busy guy. He's an authority figure in his field. He doesn't have time to research, so he takes what he hears at face value.
Yeah.
And we almost stopped talking because I used the word brainwashed or something like that, and it's like, well, thankfully we didn't stop talking, but I didn't go there again. And we're close, but he's a good example of the situation you were just describing. I mean, I think if he really had time and really, really started doing it, he would be able to figure it out, but he doesn't. And so I think he's aware of some things, I'm sure, but in terms of some of the darker stuff that we've been talking about, I'm pretty sure he doesn't.
Yeah, and during the whole COVID malarkey, they got really good. They got their machine very finely honed as far as censoring anybody who was questioning all of the narratives that they were putting out. And somebody like your brother wouldn't even know that because they're not even immersed in the sort of media circles or alternative media circles that we are. So he would never see that censorship or see things appear and then all of a sudden, 2 hours later they're scrubbed from the internet. So it's like a whole different layer of reality that most people aren't even aware of.
Exactly. And that was about the time that we almost stopped talking. Because he the whole hook, line, and sinker, the whole story. He bought the whole story, he and his family.
Yeah.
So, it was something we couldn't even talk about.
Yeah, I know the dynamic. Crazy, crazy times. Well, okay, we don't have a whole lot of time, but we've been talking about things that we see in sort of man-made objects, buildings and architecture and structures and stuff like that give us clues as to the fact that there might be a completely different narrative that we haven't been told or hasn't been revealed to us. But I'm also interested in things that we see in nature that would tell us that too. And I've heard in a conversation of yours, you were talking to somebody about, I forgot the guy's name, but giant tree stumps. And I found that so compelling as an example of something that occurs in nature that's there. No person created it. And it tells a story that, if you were just reading it in a geography book or something like that, it would tell you something completely different.
Right, it would tell you. And let me pull something up here, because this is not far from where I live. In Prescott. So I wasn't tuned into giant trees at all. and my friend Chad, who has the Deeper Conversations with Chad YouTube channel, and somebody that reached out to me in, I think it was 2021, and he'd seen my work, and we talked on Zoom, and he said, it's time for me to start my own channel. So I had a connection with him from that. And he's amazing. He's just amazing. And there's some areas where his research connects with mine directly, and some it doesn't. You know, his Deeper Conversations is just that. He covers the board. But he and I had this conversation about giant trees, and he sent me a video that he wanted me to watch, and then he said, you know, we need to talk about this. And so I watched his video, and I still wasn't on the giant tree bandwagon, but I could see he and I were looking at a lot of the same things. And then we had our first talk about trees and looked at a lot of different aspects, compared notes, compared research. And by the end of that conversation, I could see it. And I could see it in a lot of places, but especially around where I live. So I am probably maybe not even a mile from Thumb Butte.
Beautiful.
It's kind of a iconic symbol of Prescott, where I live. And my research has taken me deep down, looking into these giant trees as having been part of the energy grid system. And you know, they would have been super important in the civilization that was here prior to whatever happened here. And that the controllers turned what had been railroad tracks, and Prescott has a railroad history, even though you really have to dig around for it, as do everywhere else as well. They turned the routes into highway routes and covered everything with road surface, and it changed from the railroads to the roads, and a different source of energy. But once I could see that Thumb Butte, learned about the giant trees, I could see that as a good example of a giant tree stump.
So are you saying, Michelle, that Thumb Butte used to be a tree?
I believe that now. Another example is Devil's Tower, which a lot of people have talked about. As a giant tree stump. And then a really good example is in Tunisia, and it's called the Jugurtha Tableland, where you can see more or less what looks like a giant tree stump.
Yeah, oh, yeah, for sure. Crazy. That makes me reconsider the topography in in New Mexico as a whole. Like, as you're driving down 40, Chris and I just came that route a year or so ago. You definitely see things that look similar to that.
And
Wow.
I think it's highly likely that whatever caused all the destruction destroyed what were trees and petrified them, and probably petrified a lot of things, so that we don't even recognize them as trees anymore. And they call them natural features, and giant trees are things that show up in the Bible also, the book of Enoch and so forth. So they're not my area of study per se, but once my perception shifted about the trees, I just started to see the connections everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there's a lot of that kind of thing in the desert Southwest, so New Mexico, Arizona, probably around the Four Corners area, Colorado in that area, where Mesa Verde is.
I was also thinking of Joshua Tree National Forest and all those rock formations. I've always thought that they look like giants.
Yeah. Yes. So there's that aspect's been hidden from us. I mean, there's been some people that have done some really good research about titans, petrified giants,
Mm.
in our world. And I just had a lady send me like a bunch of pictures this morning of petrified titans. And that's not a big component of my work, but I'm really open to all of that stuff. And so, to get back to your earlier question, what happened to them? I think we're sitting on top of a mass burial, something that just happened suddenly and just killed off all kinds of life, whether human life or, these massive animals. And that's been hidden from us. That was part of the cleanup when they came in and made everything livable, so they could restart civilization and bring in the New World Order. And I think the Civil War was about that. I think they were cleaning up, either cleaning up or killing off the survivors or something along those lines.
Did you hear recently, Michelle, that the talk of the ocean that was discovered within the Earth's surface, or within the Earth's crust, that they're saying that potentially there could be an ocean inside the Earth? Do you think it's possible? Like, I don't know what your thoughts are on these tunnel systems or these cave systems that people posit are all over the United States. Do you think it's possible that some of these civilizations could have gone subterranean?
Yeah. I haven't followed it specifically, but that subject has come to my attention, of oceans in the earth and civilizations in the earth. And as a matter of fact, what is really interesting is when, if you're interested in doing your own research on some things, if you look at books, especially of the 19th century and the Jules Verne books, like Journey to the Center of the Earth,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of disclosure in those. And then another one was by Edward Bulwer Lytton, called The Power of the Coming Race. Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. And if you just look up Wikipedia and see what it says, and these scientists go down this giant tree and find this advanced civilization. I mean, it's there. And Vril is an ancient energy. It's like chi. It's like the ancients knew how to work with this energy for creation. And so it seems like the controllers have just tried to piggyback on everything that was originally for good, including this Vril, which would have, been this life force in all life. Mm-hmm. Like from the creator, from source. And now, depending on how far the rabbit hole you're already down, reptilians, the ones that put themselves into human hosts, call them Brilya, VRIL-YA. So they're like taking that identity as well.
Not heard of that.
But Vril in and of itself is a neutral energy. It can be used for very, very positive or negative. It just, like everything else, it depends on the intent that goes into it. Mm-hmm. But Vril would have originally been one of the secrets of the ancients and how they, built amazing things.
Yeah, if there were just to go back to what we were saying about giants and humans being much, much bigger at some point, that would explain a lot of the puzzles that we have, questions that we have about structures that were huge, that would have seemingly been impossible for regular size people to build. But if there was a much larger race and a more advanced race, then they would probably not only have the technology, but they would have the advantage of, a much bigger size to be able to control that technology.
Like a cathedral door that's 40 feet tall.
Yeah.
And once you know to look for it, the examples abound.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But again, we're not taught about it. There's a story that goes with everything, so why would they lie to us? Oh yeah, they must have built that during the Depression. Sure.
Yeah, people who lived in shacks built these giant cathedrals.
It's just, yeah,
of course.
there's a lot of monumental building going on in the Depression, especially in Washington D.C., but all across the country in our narrative. Big, massive, huge buildings.
But when you think about that cultural amnesia, of course people aren't going to question it. If you just have always seen that building since you were a little kid and you grow up, you don't really question, oh, how did this Parthenon show up in Dubuque, Iowa? Like, why the fuck is this thing here? You're not going to think about that because it's just ubiquitous. It's part of your daily life. And I think they rely on that.
They do. And they lost control of the narrative with the internet. But like I said, I was well into my 40s before I started noticing things. Before that, I didn't. I was like everybody else. I didn't question anything. I was aware. I was more aware than most people of certain things, but I wouldn't call myself awake prior to that time. And I mean, I can remember when I was in college, I went to college outside of Baltimore, and I went down to the University of Maryland at Baltimore Library. This is one of those big columned places. You know, what I remember is I parked in the wrong place and my car got towed, but it was one of those big buildings. Yeah, I was like, I should have really paid attention to the sign that said, "You're going to get towed if you're here between this time and this time." But I didn't see that. But again, that's an example of this massive architecture. Universities and colleges typically have them, unless they're super, super, super modern, recently built, but most of them are in these original buildings. And then high schools, junior high schools, elementary schools, they were all turned into educational facilities. One of my favorite examples is El Paso High School. Massive, massive building. Doesn't look like a high school. But that's one example of many. And a lot of the old buildings are gone, and they have built new schools, but there are still places that still use the original building, which is massive. So the examples are there, and it's just really a matter of shifting perception to start seeing what's there. Does the story match? What did they tell us? When did they build it? Who built it? How many courthouses did they have? And usually it's 3 or 4. In one location, they say this is the 4th building here. And then you see the pictures of the older buildings, and they're all ornate buildings. So that's part of the narrative that came in. And that's pretty typical.
Well, before we close this up, what would you say to somebody who is interested in the kinds of things that you research and would like to get into that too, maybe in regards to their own area that they live in? What are maybe some tips that you could give as to how to maybe start that research?
That's a good point. The best place to start for anybody interested in doing this is your own community. It's there. And so I know one lady that's followed my channel for a long time started her own, and she just takes her camera on her iPhone, her video on her iPhone, and goes around her community and films what she's seeing and talks and describes it, and her eyes are open, and it could be that simple. Or just don't believe everything you've ever been taught about every place where you live. If you're really interested in doing the research on this, but it's a big part of this awakening is, there's the lies that we've been told in the news all the time, every day, all the political stuff going on, and there's that set of lies. But then there's the set of lies about our history and who we are and where we came from, and they had to trick us into giving away our natural rights as human beings.
Yes.
And so a lot of people just go down the, what does it mean to be sovereign, and look into that aspect of it as well. Because unfortunately the legal system is based on the same kinds of lies, and that's part of what keeps us enslaved, is not knowing our rights and not knowing how to work around that system. So that's another area. And they use psychological warfare tactics. We talked about false flags. I think there's a lot going on with weather warfare, especially right now. I think this whole year has been one thing right after another. The tornado outbreaks in the Midwest and the hurricane now, I think that's engineered. And I think those things have been engineered for quite some time. They've had the technology to do those kinds of things with HARP and whatever else they have set up. So I think they've been engineering these so-called natural disasters where hurricanes hit the exact same places years apart, especially along the Gulf Coast. And I did some research along those lines of some of the major hurricanes of our times, Galveston, on up Camille, and some of the other ones. And just looking through the records on that, there were places that had direct hits more than one time. And it's like, oh, we didn't get that the first time, let's try it again, But again, the whole idea that they're not natural, they're being engineered, they're being directed in certain places in certain ways. And as horrible as that is to contemplate, it would appear that that's what's been going on. And people looking at this barrel saying, we've never seen hurricanes do this before, this early, especially this early in the season. But it kept going and going. I'm not sure where things are right now, but as it's coming in, that it just kept strong. And I've done some research on hurricanes, and they have something called an eye wall replacement cycle in the references that I've been able to find. There's cyclone bombs and things like that. So there's just a lot to question about what's going on with the weather.
For sure.
There was the tornado outbreak that took place in Oklahoma a couple of months ago, leveled the town of Sulphur, Sulphur. There was more than one tornado that night that hit that place. And by morning, it was just like obliterated. So, there's just a lot to consider. And, the thing is, I think, just not to blindly accept what we're told.
Absolutely.
And moving past that mindset.
Agreed. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for taking the time to sit and chat with us about all this very, very interesting and compelling research that you're doing. If there are listeners or people watching who would like to find you and that research, where can they go?
My blog / website is piercingtheveilofillusion.com. If you like it in writing. And then my website is, I don't know if you want to call it a blog, but it's a blog. 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 It's a blog At Michelle Gibson, let me see here. At Michelle Gibson 8946.
Fantastic.
And I have lots and lots and lots and lots of videos.
Indeed, you do.
According to YouTube right now, I have 332 videos.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing. And there's no sign of you
I
stopping.
have no life.
I would say that's a fantastic life.
It's interesting. Let me put it that way. But
Yeah.
it's mostly at home
Yes. Well, there's
with
something
with
to
my
be said
cat.
about that.
That's my perfect day. Research in the morning, make videos in the afternoon, and cat nap with my cat.
Sounds
Did-
idyllic.
Just go out for groceries and things like that.
Yes. Well, keep the faith. Keep that lifestyle going, because what's coming out of it is fascinating and incredible stuff. So I look forward to keeping up with you and your work, and hopefully you will come on again sometime and have a chat again.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I was also one of the people featured in the Old World Order video that
Yeah.
you can find that on Stu Peters' network, and it's free to watch.
Oh, cool.
And Sean Hibbler produced it and
Uh-huh.
interviewed, I guess there's 8 or 9 of us, and he put it really together very well and covered
Fantastic.
a number of the topics that we talked about.
Cool. I keep forgetting that. I've been meaning to watch it. How recent was that?
It came out at the end of May. It was supposed to come out on May 25th, which was a Saturday, and there was a cyber attack on the Stu Peters network, and so it took a couple more days for them to get it to where they could get it out without that happening.
Well,
So
cool.
it's about
Yeah,
an hour and a
definitely.
half long.
Fantastic. I will definitely check that out, and we'll put a link in the episode notes so that people can find that and your stuff online. So, all right,
I appreciate
Michelle,
it. Thank
you. Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And if you can just leave your browser open, your window open, just to make sure that all the audio and the video uploads, and I think it'll tell you when it's done, and then feel free to close it after that. It should just take a few minutes.
Okay, sure, that would be fine.
Okay. We'll have... Go ahead. You have nothing to add? Okay.
Yes.
Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will let you know when this comes out.
Okay, thank you both very much. Enjoyed
Absolutely.
visiting
That was
with
a
you
pleasure
tonight.
meeting.
Yes,
That
thank
was
you,
great.
thank you. Enjoy the rest
And
of
we-
your evening.
Yeah.
I think I have a little bit more time left than you do.
Yeah.
Time for
Well,
my
it was
animal
great.
rescue videos and Food Network cooking competitions.
There you go.
That's-
Well, it was
That's my
wonderful.
evening.
That sounds fantastic. It was wonderful meeting you, and we'll keep in touch and chat again somewhere down the line.
Sounds great. Thanks again.
Okay.
Enjoyed it very much.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Like,
likewise.
good night.
I was just wondering if you feel like you got your Tartaria needs met.
No.
No. Yeah, that'll take a lot more deep diving.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk to Matt Esky.
Cool. Well,
I keep forgetting to reach out to him, but he's another Tartaria expert.
spurt. Is that like a slang term? Hey, are you a spurt? That doesn't sound quite appropriate, but okay. But in the meantime,
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, she has tons and tons of fantastic content on her site, and I've tried to listen to, like I do often when I'm researching for a podcast, listen to some of it at work, but it's just it requires you
Too
being
vig.
on it, to be listening closely to it, and there's tons and tons of visuals, maps and pictures and videos, and it's really amazing stuff. She's really put a lot of work into her vast catalog of research. Okay.
Nice.
You,
So that's on her YouTube page or on her blog that you're seeing that.
I think they're in both places.
But
Yeah.
when you're trying to listen, are you trying to listen to
On YouTube.
YouTube? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you couldn't listen to a blog.
No. I mean, I think there are apps you can get that will read you websites or something, or maybe something on your phone that will do that. But I can't stand computer voices reading stuff. I think that's so lazy when people do that in YouTube videos.
I can't. I just can't.
I just can't.
I just can't with all that. It's terrible. Yeah. Good times. Good times.
Okay. You're not into this after babble that much, but
I'm still absorbing our conversation. I think I wanted to focus more on the it's such a visual. I'm just thinking. I look up when I'm thinking. It's such a visual subject that I feel like it would serve us well to have like visual aids to that. Because one thing that when Michelle was talking about like thinking of a city and like a hill or a incline in a city, I've thought of that, but it would be great to see a visual representation of that where I could see an example of what she's talking about. And this is just kind of one of those subject matters that I think the ley line map really helped.
yeah.
And maybe sometimes with Riverside, if the person's not clear, if the image is fuzzy, it's hard for me to get into it. And so I never felt like I could really see her face. I felt like it was fuzzy. And so that can be challenging for me to feel connected. But I'm always curious in hearing other people's perspectives, and I like the thumb butte image and the idea that these mesas or these buttes could actually be petrified trees. I think that's cool.
Yeah, imagine how big they would be if they were the full tree. Like my first thing that my skeptical mind says is, well, why aren't there more clumps of those? But if that's the stump, then the tree's got to be pretty fucking big, which means that they wouldn't probably be as close together as obviously trees in a human-sized forest.
Yeah, it probably wouldn't grow in a forest.
Yeah. You don't think so? They would just be more like, because there are places in the desert where there's just a few trees in the middle of no place.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And maybe some of the stumps are buried.
It's so, when she was talking about her brother, and I was, the first person I thought of was someone we're going to interview soon who has studied religious texts. And I was thinking, man, if your brother doesn't want to hear about mud flood, he ain't gonna want to hear this interview we've got coming up, because it would, if you think that upending someone's reality based on whether or not giants were walking around, this is gonna throw a monkey wrench into many realities.
For sure.
And I have to remind myself that we're all on this journey. Every single one of us is on this journey, and every single one of us is getting information at a different pace and a different source and a different interpretation of that information. And when you've been doing this for as long as I've been doing it, or you've been doing it as long as you've been doing it, it's easy to get into a place of judgment of people and be like, oh, you just figured this out. I've been doing that. I cut my teeth on MK Ultra, And I think where I have to be charitable is understanding that my journey is no more valuable than her journey. She's just on a different road or different piece of the road that I'm on. And I remember that feeling when I was on a similar piece of road and thinking, we have to wake up people. We have to help people. We need mass, and we need more people to understand. And the more people that understand, the more important it's going to be, because there's going to be change. And I think maybe on some level that feels comforting to think that. But I think when you're in this for so long, you get to the point where you just recognize that you still don't know shit. It's what I said to you when we were talking about this other person we're going to interview. Like, I just keep waking up to, man, I don't know anything. And I've been doing this for a long fucking time, and I still don't know anything. And so I think that's where we have to be gentle with each other as humans, and recognize that she's just trying to figure her shit out. I'm just trying to figure my shit out. You're just trying to figure your shit out. And none of us is better than anybody else on the journey. And it's easy to look at someone like, sometimes I look at David Icke, or I look at Alex Jones, and I think, dial it back a scotch. Just kick it back a little bit. Like, be gentle with people. Like, you're so deeply embedded in this. You've been doing this for 40 fucking years. You're screaming. You're freaked out. You got veins popping out of your side of your head. Like, it's okay. Like, just relax. Because I think you get so kind of wound up that it's easy to think that you're the only person who gets it. But we're all trying. At least we're all trying. Even if we're misdirected or confused, or we've got the wrong information, at least we're fucking trying.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to say that you know some stuff. I think the way that my take on that dynamic is that you are an ardent doodler. It's not an insult. Is that I know a little bit more than I did before, but what I realize is there's a lot more to know than I ever suspected before, as far as the vastness of it and the layers. And,
totally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all my point. I made my point very, very quickly. So yeah, I think that, and knowing too, a different relationship to knowing. I don't know if I would say that I know something, but I highly suspect, because of either the repetition that I've heard from many, many different sources, from varied contexts, or when something keeps appearing again and again and again after all these other trends kind of wax and wane, but this thing or these things keep coming back. It's like, okay, there's something there. It may not be the thing that this particular group of words describes, but there's something underneath the surface that's trying to get at, and I've got to keep an eye on that. So yeah,
For me, it's the opposite thing. It's like, and I'm not saying the opposite of what you're saying. I'm saying it's the opposite of what I've thought. So I grew up thinking, we talked about this the other day when we were talking about Peter Pan. I grew up thinking Peter Pan was the good guy and Captain Hook was the evil character. Well, what if I was wrong? What if Captain Hook really was the good guy and Peter Pan was the evil character? Because Peter Pan was the kidnapper and luring children away and doing all this creepy shit. But because we've been trained to think this is this way, then we don't really necessarily question certain things. And so then that spills over to everything. Like, oh, okay, so this is what I've been told, so I don't really have to question it because that's just the way it always is, and that's just the way it should be. So I think that's the constant awakening that's happening internally, is recognizing maybe I can't trust anything I've been told. So Peter Pan is the bad guy and Hook is the good guy, and and a million other examples of that. So I think that's where it's important to be gentle with yourself, and it's important to be gentle with other people, because we're all just trying to figure it out. In the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do, is just figure it out.
Yeah. And I'll pick on science again, because I love to pick on science. Institutionalized corporate science is that when you realize how many variables there are, and that a big variable in the whatever hypothetical experiment we're talking about is the experimenter, then, and what they're hoping to find, or what they're superimposing on whatever situation that they've set up in a completely unnatural, unorganic way to repeat over and over again, and then graph it and all this bullshit, that it's all subjective. Even that is subjective. There's subjectivity to everything, because every element involved in a situation is complex. There's many, many layers. There's the mood that the scientist is in.
Also just to piggyback on that point, every experiment has an observer.
That's true.
So you can't take the observation out of an experiment.
Yeah.
And so that is what is going to have the greatest influence.
That's one layer. And then the other layer is who is informing the scientists to look in that direction, and giving them money to look in that direction for sometimes a particular, like, see if this happens. Not like see if anything happens, but see if this happens. So right then and there, that scientist is only expecting either this thing to happen or not to happen. So that leaves out the complete, the wide, multi-layered, multi-dimensional spectrum of all the possible things that could happen, because there's not an open mind there. And again, a hypothetical situation, not saying all science and scientists are like this, but, science, I think we've lost the category of the self-made scientist. Like, we associate science with a lot of highly expensive laboratory equipment and all this millions of dollars of funding that you need. And it's like, what happened to the Magellans of the world, or the Galileos of the world?
Because they get made fun of. So when someone says, I'm conducting a social experiment or a sociological experiment, someone laughs at that, because it's like, well, who the fuck are you, and who paid for that, and what, So I think a lot of this is what you're talking about, is about the eye of the onlooker, and being connected with that, and connected to how people perceive you. So science is a lane, and if you're not a doctor or a researcher, you shouldn't be in that lane. So you're not a scientist. So I think that's the thing that you're saying, is that people can get involved in inquiry without necessarily utilizing the scientific method, and that can still be valuable.
Or, you could utilize the scientific method, but in a less rigorous, limited way. You could repeat things over and over again if what you're trying to find out or study is something that's actually repeatable, which many of the most interesting things in reality aren't, in my mind.
Right, or they're case studies. It's not something that can be repeatable.
Yeah.
So junk science is the thing that I think you have the biggest problem with, that you have identified, which is what you're saying, which is someone comes in, some corporation comes in and says, these are the results I want. Now back an experiment up into that, so that I can get those results. Yeah. That's not science. So I think, to be fair, it's very important to parse that out, that there are people who are in earnest conducting scientific experiments that aren't replicatable, and because they're not replicatable, they never get published. And so there's a shit ton of stuff that's peer reviewed that is junk science, and then there's a ton of stuff that's peer reviewed that gets thrown out or never published because it falls in this category that you're talking about.
But even the peer review process has been shown to just be
It's a
buddy's
scam.
old boys network. And reading a book like The Real Anthony Fauci, my fucking God, example after example after example after example after example after example about how bloody, corrupt, malleable, at the whims of
Unethical.
yeah. It's just ridiculous. So
Yeah.
I have little faith. And I'm not saying in people like Rupert Sheldrake, for instance, or people that are actually the Magellans of the world that go out and are trying to find maybe the reasons behind something instead of, is it this or that? They're just going, okay, we're just going to look at this and see what we see what it shows us. But that's why I have a chip on my shoulder. You know that. I mean, we've talked about this on air a lot and much more off air. So you know exactly my feelings about all this. And that's why I like Psychonauts that's one reason or one category of the kind of self-exploration or like, okay, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to make my own experiment. I'm going to take this substance, put myself in this particular setting and see what the fuck happens. And then maybe in a couple of months, I'll try it again and see what the fuck happens. Like that to me communicates more of a reality, even though it's subjective. But when you realize it's all subjective, it's like, it's just as important as anything else, I think. I know you have a problem with that, maybe.
No, I don't have a problem with
Okay.
it. I just don't think that you necessarily have to call that science. I think observation is observation, and I think that there's something valuable about ethnography and going into different cultures or different environments and observing and just noting what you're observing. But even in those circumstances, you're still a subjective party that's seeing something that you're not necessarily a part of. So anytime you're talking about science, there is room for messiness and there's room for error. So I think we can get into more of a humanistic perspective and get the same results and not have to call it science. So it's just being a sentient being and being tuned into the environment around you. I think what I'm sick of talking about is the predator race and what their fucking agenda is and all this shit, because to me, that is such a limited view of what our reality and the possibilities of our reality are. And what we're doing is we're feeding that narrative with fear and then empowering and emboldening that narrative, when I'm way more interested in not just solutions, but other curiosities, because I think that it's kind of one of those things like, if your kid's acting bad and you don't pay attention to that, eventually they just stop because they're bored, because they're not getting the attention that they want. And this feels somewhat like that, like this very immature way of conducting the human experience, which is we keep focusing on the people, the bad actors, and the way people are acting badly, and not really investing so much in what we're doing and where we're putting our energies and the things that empower us. So I want to get into that mindset more. And I know I don't embody that all the time, but I think that that's an important goal in this space that we're in, that we recognize it doesn't fucking matter what Klaus Schwab wants. What matters is how I treat my husband or how I treat my kids, or am I living in a world of fear about things that I can't control? And am I allowing those things to incapacitate me in my daily life? Or am I living in a world where I am present and I'm capable and I have ownership and I do feel sovereignty?
I understand what you mean. I think that I don't mind talking about those things as long as they're, they have something to do with the subjects that we're talking about. But because I don't react with fear, I don't feel hopeless. I don't feel like, God, I have no control over my life. These are the people who are running everything and there's nothing I can do about it. Like, I don't feel that at all. I feel like a very, in some ways, a very, like I can differentiate between the greater context of what's happening and my own way of assimilating that. Assimilating, maybe that's not the word I'm looking for, but the way that I take in that information. So if that's a part of the puzzle that we're solving, okay, well, I want to hear about that too. It may not be pleasant, and I might even sometimes react with fear, but if it's truly a part of what's happening, I want to know about it so I know maybe that it's not going to do me any good to obsess about that aspect of things. But the fact that that exists, supposedly, or maybe it doesn't. When I hear different narratives, I don't find myself like moving my eggs from one basket to another basket and going, oh my God, now this is what's going on. Oh my God. Like I don't feel like I react to it that way. So I don't mind those things coming up, but I understand what you said. There are podcasts and people who focus on nothing but that and pointing out the holes in everything and the faults and that's all fine and dandy, but what the fuck are we going to do in the face of this? Like, no, I'm not down with that at all. And hopefully we don't inspire that in people that watch or listen to this podcast. Hopefully they come away with a feeling of positivity and hope and empowerment and feeling like they're on the right track and that they're, making the best out of their lives and the lives of the people around them. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. We've been babbling for 24 minutes.
Thank you all for listening to this or watching it. It is greatly appreciated. Yes. Let's see. What do we say after a podcast?
Great shit coming up. Lots of good stuff happening. Melt. Protonmail.com. Be there. Live it.
And yours?
Sure.
Your email.
No one's gonna fucking email me.
Oh, they will
So
too. They have emailed
No, they don't need to. Never mind.
you. Okay.
If they really want to, they'll email you and then they'll reach out to me. If they really, really want to.
Okay. Thank you all for collaborating with your valuable attention and focus throughout this. Hopefully you felt it was worth your while. I suggest checking out Michelle's research. Very, very fascinating stuff and much, much more detailed and vast than we even began to cover here. So, okay. You've moved on to primping. How am I going to look for the next act? Let's see. We love you all. Have a great life. Till the next episode. Even past the next episode. Even before the last one.
Bye.
Meow.